All right, got a recording going. And now we just need the screen share function, Rocky.
Okay, Dave, you're good to go.
All right, perfect.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, hey Sheila, we're gonna get
Hi,
started.
sorry. Okay, I'm having problems with my internet, so sorry about this.
Okay, no worries.
Log on.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are the New Mexico Tribal Homeownership Coalition. This webinar is being recorded for our friends and allies and others who are not able to join us today. This will be posted to the MFA site and YouTube. And so that's available at a later time. But if you haven't joined us for a while, the New Mexico Homeownership Coalition, we are, I guess, version 2, you might say. We really kind of want to recognize the memory of Eric Schmieder at MFA, who helped get all this started, and honor his work, stand on his shoulders. Also Marvin Ginn, who's happily in retirement these days, but they laid the groundwork and a strong foundation for what the coalition does, and there's a group of us that are continuing on. So we want to invite you to visit us at our new webpage, which is hosted by the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority. I want to thank them. And a lot of partners that have been part of this over the years, tribes and pueblos, public sector agencies, and private sector partners as well, not just in New Mexico, but from throughout Indian country. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Dave Castillo. I'm the CEO for Native Community Capital. We're a Native CDFI based out of Laguna, Pueblo, and I'll be moderating today's event. As far as the coalition and its work, we are expecting and planning to have 4 meetings a year. And we'll also want to recognize the Southwest Tribal Housing Alliance. SWIFA is made up of the tribal housing directors from Arizona and New Mexico, and they focus on a whole range of tribal housing issues. The New Mexico Tribal Homeownership Coalition, however, focuses, just as the name would imply, exclusively on homeownership issues. And so SWIFA is a partner and ally, critical to homeownership initiatives in Indian country, and we focus just on this matter. Also want to recognize the Montana Coalition, the South Dakota Coalition, the Oklahoma Coalition. There's a whole host of us now that have taken on this work and coordinate, collaborate, sometimes commiserate on these issues. And so I want to recognize them if they're joining us today. But as you can see here, we will do these sessions throughout the year, and COVID permitting, we'll meet again in person and also schedule some site visits to invite tribal leadership and others to touch, feel, and see some of these home ownership projects that are going up around New Mexico, Pueblo, and tribal communities. But for today, today is our December session, and we really like to focus the end of the year on a recap of activities across Indian country and New Mexico with our allies, partners, friends, associates, colleagues at the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and others to talk about land title and recordation. We know that there are discussions that are happening offline between specific tribes and the Bureau on matters that need resolution or celebration, as the case may be. And today's session is not to really focus on any particular tribe or Pueblo's matters at hand, but rather to give our guests and those who have an interest in this topic, especially elected tribal leaders and appointed officials, an introduction to some of the issues. The questions that we'll ask today are threefold. We're going to ask our panelists to describe their work in their particular area, whether that be in a Pueblo community or within the Bureau. Talk to us about what's going well with specifically the Hearth Act and land leasing for residential development in tribal or Pueblo communities. Ask them what can be improved, and most importantly, ask them to talk to us a little bit about what advice they might give to a tribe or a Pueblo who is considering implementing Hearth policies to govern their residential land leasing process. Before we begin, we did have a little bit of a change in the lineup, so we've got a little bit of extra time this morning. Want to remind you to put your comments in the chat, or if you're joining us by Facebook Live via Facebook. And Charlene, I think you're monitoring one of those? No? We've got Rocky on the line too, who's helping monitor. So I'll be looking at the chat function here on here on the Zoom here. And Rocky, if you could get Dustin, it looks like he might be having a little trouble with their Facebook Live feed. In any case, moving along here. You know, just as context and background for what we're talking about today, this graphic kind of illustrates the issue, right? I mean, literally and figuratively, a lot of times we find, you know, tribes we're just stuck in the mud a little bit. The graph that's inserted here on this picture shows the problem. And we all know this. I mean, those of us who've been working on tribal housing issues know this to be the case. When I was at Fannie Mae, we had the same internal numbers, if you will. And then this graph was put together by the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis Center for New Construction Development using that same HUD data. And the picture is the same. It hasn't changed. The number of 184 loans, again, in the 184 program as part of NAHASA, was intended to increase mortgage lending on tribal trust lands. And yet, as we can see from the graph, that activity grew almost exponentially off of tribal lands. That's just where the business went. And mortgage lending on tribal trust lands has remained stagnant. So it's incredibly frustrating. And it's a situation that we find ourselves in even almost 25 years after the passage of NAHASA. Our friends at Enterprise Community Partners helped put together this handbook on homeownership in Native communities. And I really like this graph here, this little image, if you will, that demonstrates the complexity of developing a mortgage market and using private development financing on tribal lands for homeownership initiatives. There are a lot of moving parts. There is some complexity to it, and that's just the nature of the beast. But it really is just a technical complexity. You know, back in 1996, a gentleman from Pine Ridge asked the then Secretary of HUD, why is it that we can put a man on the moon, but we can't put a bank on Indian reservations? And more recently, we've landed a rover on Mars. So we know how to do things that are technically difficult. The question is the political will in place? Do we have the capacity? Do we have the partnerships? And do we have the pieces that are identified in this kind of graphic? Just by way of history, for those of you who aren't familiar with the NAHASA legislation and legislation that came after that, I started my career in 1997 in Indian housing when the first negotiated rulemaking sessions were being had to put the regulations in place for this new legislation called NAHASA. So most of my career has been shaped by NAHASDA, its effects, and homeownership in Indian country. And I know there are folks on the call who have been working on this issue just as long and longer. But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the legislation was signed into law in 1996 during the Clinton administration, second Clinton administration. And then the negotiated rulemaking began around 97, 98, and implementation thereafter. And one might think that we got that legislation put in place. And I think there were some folks that felt, well, you know, we could hang that banner on the battleship, mission accomplished. But it turned out not necessarily to be the case. One of the comments that was made to me early in my career by a banker from what was Norwest Bank at the time, you know, he approached me after one of these meetings and that we were having at the time with Fannie Mae and regulators and others. And he came up to me after the meeting. He said, you know, all this is really great, Dave. I really appreciate what you and others are trying to do here. But why would I go through the brain damage of doing a deal in Indian country when I could get what I need from my regulator by serving Blacks or Hispanics? And it was an honest question. I don't think there was any, you know, there wasn't any intention behind it other than to kind of really try to figure out, this is a lot of work. Why would I do this? And that comment and many others have been made over the years, and you know, not just from bankers, but from tribal leaders, from federal agency officials, from national nonprofit intermediary leadership. It's difficult. It's technically difficult, but we can do this. I think what this graphic really represents is that just because we passed, or NAHASDA was signed into law, does not mean that was the only thing that was needed. In fact, some have talked about how that was kind of putting the cart before the horse. And in fact, what we've seen in years after is that there was a whole infrastructure of policy that needed to be put in place to really allow NAHASDA to take hold, and home ownership in particular to develop. The Regal Act is listed there, the HERA Act, the Hearth Act. If we just look at these first two, again, NAHASDA is part of the self-determination era, and that following the PL 93-638, the Indian Education and Self-Determination Act, really is what is behind NAHASDA. Self-determination for tribes being able to determine how they manage and implement programs within the exterior boundaries of their homelands. And so it's incredibly powerful and important. Thereafter, the Regal Act created the CFI Fund, which created new sources of capital, or I should say the Regal Act was passed in 1994 before NAHASDA. However, the creation of native CFIs did not really begin until 2001. And that was a critical part of what's necessary to allow for private sector capital to flow into tribal communities for home ownership, as well as small business lending and others. But again, another critical part of the puzzle. If we go a little further, in 2008, of course, we had the HERA Act, and that contained a provision to include CFIs as eligible federal home loan bank borrowers. So low cost capital, again, intended for home ownership. Now that provision within the HERA Act has not necessarily seen as much daylight in Indian country as it could. So more work to be done there. Then, of course, we had in 2012 what we're going to talk about today, which is the Hearth Act, which essentially, again, following that concept of tribal self-determination, self-governance, allows for tribal leasing regulations. And once approved by the Department of Interior, the Secretary, no further Department of Interior leasing approval is required. That becomes law. And if you don't implement Hearth, we'll talk about this today, then you're operating under 25 CFR 162. And so there are two ways you can go about it. And we're going to talk about the benefits of Hearth today. Of course, HERA legislation also required GSCs to serve tribes more consistently in an improved manner. But even though that legislation was passed in 2008, it didn't really get implemented till 2016. And the government, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the GSEs, referred to here as GSEs, government-sponsored entities, are still struggling a little bit on how to serve tribes as they are required to serve Appalachian communities, Hispanic communities, African-American communities. And so that work continues. And then, of course, present day, we've got the stimulus funding, and that is a massive amount of capital, and really the kinds of amounts that are needed to make the changes that are necessary. So as you can see, it's more than just the NAHASDA legislation. It's more than just having your tribe have a home ownership program. There are a lot of different pieces. And what we're going to do today is focus just on the Hearth Act. A lot of different moving pieces, but at the end of the day, this is about coming together. This is about sharing information. It's about forging partnerships. This is about working through the issues and having a conversation just as an introduction today. But hopefully we can make some connections here on today's call and cement some of those, put a face to a name and take this to the next level wherever your Pueblo or tribal community is at with regard to this issue. So for today, then, I just gave that welcome and introduction. We've had a little bit of a lineup change today. We are kind of the end of the calendar year, and a lot of the Pueblo communities have different matters they need to attend to as the year closes. That was a case with Mr. Loreto from the Pueblo of Jemez. He got called into the governor's office to address some issues before the year ends, and we wish him well there. He just texted me before the session started and say, hey, duty calls. So wish him well, and we're going to confer with him afterwards. Mr. Phillips also was unable to confirm today, but we do have Mr. Burson, who is the director of the Pueblo of Laguna Government Affairs Office, and he helps oversee implementation of Hearth. We're going to have him speak first, and then thereafter we'll speak with Ms. Kidman and Ms. Jones, who are realty specialists with the Bureau, specifically on the Hearth Act. Also joining us today is Mr. Moran and Ms. Nunn, who are from the Office of the Solicitor. They're at the central office of the Bureau, and they're available to take your questions with regard to very specifically the legal sufficiency review for tribal Hearth Act submissions. There is a process that tribes and pueblos must go through to get those proposed regulations in place. And essentially, we have the experts in the room. And so I'd like to begin with Mr. Burson. Ms. Burson, can you turn on your camera if it's not already so? I'm going to see, there you are. And Mr. Burson, if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit more, I'll turn it over to you. But also, I'll just ask you those questions that I started with. First of all, can you talk to us a little bit about how the Hearth Act has been implemented there at the Pueblo of Laguna? I know that the role of the village officials, the mayor dumas, play a role in land assignments before they get to, your office. Maybe a little bit of overview there, just the uniqueness of that. What's going well? What can be improved? And most importantly, what advice would you have for other tribes that are looking to implement leasing regulations, and particularly the Hearth Act, to accelerate and facilitate mortgage lending on tribal trust lands? Mr. Burson, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Castillo. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Pueblo of Laguna, which also makes me the lead counsel or head attorney for the Pueblo as an employee of the Pueblo. I had a large part to play in the development of our Hearth Act regulations for residential leasing purposes here at the Pueblo a few years back, which got approved about a year and a half ago, I think. And just by way of extension, we decided to split our Hearth Act regulations into two parts. A regulation specifically directed at residential leasing because of some unique features about the Pueblo. And then all other leasing will be governed by what we're calling our business purpose leasing regs, which are currently with the BIA undergoing review. So with the establishment of the residential leasing code, that was done primarily to assist future homeowners here at the Pueblo in converting their Pueblo land assignments to leases so that the leases could be used as security for the repayment of the mortgages that they were going to seek under typically under guaranteed federal home loan programs like USDA or HUD programs or even the VA. And those lending agencies, plus all of the third-party regular banks that might have any interest in doing that, require a lease to be used as a security instrument as opposed to a Pueblo land assignment. And so the aim of our Hearth Act regulations was to try to make that process of conversion from a Pueblo land assignment to a residential lease as smooth, as simple as possible, and to not impose any artificial barriers more than would normally be necessary, just to assure that you have a good, valid instrument at the end of the day. And that was the primary focus on that. And that's one of the reasons why we split it from all other business, all other kinds of leasing, was because we were purposefully going to try to streamline and make it much more streamlined as allowed under the Hearth Act, just meeting the minimum requirements of the Hearth Act for BIA purposes, approval purposes, but really try to grease the wheels on that transaction. Because one of the things that we kept hearing from our constituents, community members, was it's very complicated and difficult, it seems, to get a loan in Indian country for home improvements, for buying a new home or buying a previously used home. And we didn't want to have the act of converting a business, a Pueblo land assignment into a residential lease to be an additional barrier or additional cause of aggravation for that already complicated and difficult process. And so the way the Pueblo land assignments come into being is they are issued to community members of each of the 6 villages by the local Madomos or local village officials for that village. And they are recorded with Pueblo, but as I said earlier, we know of no lender except the Pueblo itself, which has a lending program for home loan purposes. But we know of no other lender that will accept a land assignment as sufficient security to secure a home loan. And so that's why they all have to be converted to leases. Is there anything else that you'd like for me to speak on?
That's a really excellent overview there. I wonder, kind of as implementation has taken place, I know there are some other Pueblos that have been at this a little longer. There's some that are just beginning. There are some that are kind of in process. And as I said, having discussions with the Bureau on specific details. I see Greta Armijo's here. She's one of the tribes that's looking to implement that. I just wonder from your perspective, particularly your, as government affairs, what's gone well with implementation of Hearth? Again, what could be improved, and what advice would you give to others as they start to look at this option?
So the implementation.
Hey, James, I think I muted you by accident. Let me just something. Either I did or are you back with us?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I got muted either, but all right. So we think the implementation was relatively smooth. We were really well prepared to assume the duties of the BIA for review and had that really built into the processes that we laid out in the residential leasing code. And we had the experienced realty program manager here at the Pueblo, Mr. Graham, Steve Graham, ready to implement it. He had had previous BIA experience in their realty program and didn't require any onboarding or any specific learning on his part to be able to implement the program. So it really fit hand in glove with what we were doing with the BIA, and we were just we were largely our processes that we put in our code were largely the processes. We were codifying the processes were already ironed out and had running up to that point. So there was no implementation drag whatsoever as far as our implementation went. It was seamless to go from what BIA was doing to what we took over from them. And so all good. The one of the things that we're working on to improve at this point is off the Hearth Act model, but it's just that the Pueblo several years ago came up with a home loan program of its own in order to supplement the funding that would be available for home loans purposes on the Pueblo itself, more of as a remedial, it has more remedial features to it in order to be able to loan money to the less credit worthy, if you will, that didn't quite meet standard underwriting for normal lenders in order to backfill and fill some gaps. And that seems to have worked okay, but we have some complaints that that's a bit onerous to get through. So we think we've got it well implemented and very smooth.
So just to recap there, one of the keys, it seems like, is having the capacity in-house to really implement and bringing someone in who's got some knowledge, experience with whether it's the TAMS, software or, working through the bureau process would be one key. And then locally there in terms of the mortgage lending, we certainly have knowledge of that as well, but just, is the community prepared for a new product and that process, as opposed to what most tribes have had, which is low rent housing for very long. So there's some learning there that needs to take place, not just within the tribal government and the management of the regulation, but rolling it out and adopting kind of the perspective of home ownership as opposed to just rental. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I'd like to expound a little bit further on that. You make some good points in as much as any kind of new program needs to come with a significant community education component. It should be anticipated and implemented along with it, because it is a relatively steep learning curve on some of these programs. It's easy for folks to misunderstand. Now, of course, whenever you roll out a new program like housing, not everybody's in the same boat at the same time ready for housing. You've always got, and you need to try to, I think the important point would be try to aim any community education to those that would actually be
Hey, James, we got muted again real quickly. I think, hey, Rocky, can you unmute Mr. Burson or?
So yeah, I saw that it got muted. I don't, it's kind of spooky.
Yeah, I think we're trying to and I'll ask everyone who's on the line here. We heard some background noise, some people taking phone calls and whatnot. So I think we're just trying to cut back on the background noise. But please do keep yourself on mute as our speakers are speaking, and then we'll ask you to take yourself off mute when it's your turn to speak. So thank you, Mr. Merson. Please continue.
Yeah, if you can aim your community education material to the most receptive parts of your audience, then I think that's an important ingredient to always think about when you're trying to do anything new with your community.
Can I ask you, and I don't know if this is a sensitive subject or not. I know when we deal with this at the tribal level, you know, our comment is that's not our realm. That needs to be taken care of there, and we're happy to help you as soon as that's done. But in the case of particularly Pueblo communities, you know, there's traditional law, fundamental law. Sometimes tribes call it fundamental law. It's unwritten, but it is, you know, has been in place from time immemorial, and there are certain duties, responsibilities, practices, traditions that must be observed. At Laguna, the mayor dumas retain a lot of that authority. I believe the term translated in English means land keepers or something similar. Can you speak to how the village officials, you know, their role relative to your role and implementation of Hearth and the leasing process, what that interplay is like, and how tribes and other pueblos might consider that as they look to implement?
Okay, yeah, the Midomos are the first, usually the first place a community member has to start to obtain a land assignment. And there are requirements and we have 6 villages, and each village has its set of village officers, and those village officers are entrusted with making assignments of land for use as either home sites or farm sites, depending on, you know, what's available, what's appropriate for that land. And so they have largely the discretion on what land can get assigned to an individual community member for use as a home site. Now, if they have the means to, if they have the means, then they can put a house out there without anything further. But if they need to go get capital to either buy a manufactured home or mobile home, or to build on site, then the next step they have to go through, once having obtained a land assignment, is to convert that land assignment to a residential lease so that they can then use that to attract capital for their purposes. And so we don't have a lot of direct interaction. It's more of a handoff. The village Midomos, or in the first instance, they are solely involved with the assignment of the land, making it available to the community member. And then that community member, as a next step, takes the land assignment as a document, and then goes through the process that we've developed with our residential leasing code to turn it into a residential lease.
Right. So we've talked a little bit about the community members and making sure that there's community education on that front. We've talked about the village officials and their ascribed roles and their interaction. One more piece then. I know you do a lot of analysis and are able to kind of provide background information for the tribal leadership within the Pueblo Council deliberations on matters such as this. What advice might you offer to other practitioners in the field who are charged with bringing this forward to their Pueblo councils or tribal councils for consideration? Are there any key points or areas that tribal leadership need to be aware of as they consider implementing Hearth and residential leasing and mortgage lending generally in their communities?
Gosh. So one of the main issues that I see among leadership is anytime you talk about lending and the lenders wanting to have a secured interest in the property that they're lending money on, the final product, is there's this tension of the the Indian government giving up control over its land to a third party whom they are not sure whether or not they trust. And that's the bank, right? And that tension, I don't know how it's just one of those aspects that exist. It's embedded, and but it's a necessary evil that in order to attract capital, that's going to happen. That the person with the money needs to have a secured interest in the land upon which the house is built or sitting. And that's a tension that is the most difficult part to navigate in it. But once the rules provide for that to happen, is just getting over that initial resistance to give up all of that control that they would normally have, and then how to deal with it. You don't have to deal with it if nothing goes wrong in that transaction. There's no default, and the bank doesn't try to foreclose. It's a non-issue. But once the bank situation gets into a default, the homeowner is in default to the lender. Now we have that issue rises up again, and it's something we have to try to navigate very carefully and try to resolve the foreclosure action in a way that's satisfactory to the tribe's interest, and that's the most difficult part. But
well, at the end of the day, this is with a privilege and prerogative that tribes maintain under the Nahasda legislation and Hearth and others. It is part of self-determination. So it is their, in my view, their prerogative to control that. I've certainly, and many of us that are on this call today have presented before tribal councils. I had a gentleman, a council member from one of the villages tell me directly, don't come talking to us about mortgage lending in our village. The village leadership do not want to hear it, and they're not amenable to, putting the village's land, in potential jeopardy if in the case there is exactly what you're talking about, this kind of conflict. And yet other villages have welcomed it. So I usually put up a graphic and some of the presentations that I do, and I kind of compare the mortgage lending off reservation with mortgage lending on reservation. And one of the items that I highlight there is that off the reservation, everyone's making money, right? The lender's making money, the real estate agent's making money, the title company's making money, the folks who are selling the house are making money, the folks that are buying the house expect the home to appreciate, so they're making money over the long term. By comparison, on tribal land, I think my personal belief is what's driving or hindering the mortgage market on tribal land is the fact that most of the people that are involved, their primary interest is in retaining tribal land within tribal control. And so then what's created around that concept is a bureaucracy which is intended to not necessarily stifle mortgage lending, but really look carefully at what kind of agreements are getting put in place such that they avoid any jeopardy of losing any more of tribal land to non-Indians. And in that case, it's a good thing. It's not a good thing if folks are living in lean-tos and sheds and their trucks because they can't get a lease or a land assignment or a mortgage. So, I think one of the tribal leaders some years ago said, if you're going to be sovereign, act sovereign. And another tribal leader mentioned to me, there's a difference between what people need, what there's a demand for, and the opportunity that we as tribal governments, she was speaking for herself as a chairwoman of a tribe, create for our tribal members. And that's our job, is to create the opportunity and address that tension. So it's just one more I think, issue that needs to get addressed, and that's what we are paid to do. So I think all of us are happy to do it, and you know, we'll land a bank on an Indian reservation here before too long. I'm glad that we're able to serve Laguna, but let's see. I had asked. Let's see. We're closing in on our time to switch to our next speaker. I really appreciate you, Mr. Burson, your work. And I see a comment here from Miss Plummer, who's from Montana, and native CDFI there. Let's see here. Tanya, you know, Tanya comes from the mortgage lending industry. I think she has a comment here on the process, and she's serving her tribe. Let's see, can you unmute yourself, Tanya, before we move over to our friends from the Bureau here?
Hi, Dave.
Oh, there you are. Hey, Tanya,
Hey.
go ahead. Hey, it's good to see you. And congratulations on all your work there in Montana and the tribal communities. And did you have a comment on this matter?
I was just going to expand on that a little bit, that one thing that we've done with our tribal council, because he's very right, there's a very real fear that we're going to, if we open up mortgaging capability, that we're going to potentially lose all of our lands. And it really is it's a valid but an unrealistic fear. And so we've begun to expand the education process with our tribal council and talk about things with regard to risk mitigation that exists now that didn't exist 20 years ago, you know, including the strength of the pre and post close education through the native CDFI, and just much more hands-on, high touch education processes with our homeowners. That really is upfront proactive risk mitigation to limit the occurrence of any potential foreclosure. And then we're also considering adding a deed of trust process to our mortgage code so that in the unfortunate event of a foreclosure process, the means of recovery is just much speedier. It's done right at the tribal land office, outside of tribal courts, and through first right of refusal, our tribal enterprise, tribal CDFI, or the tribe itself all have option to step in, purchase that home, and then get it back in the hands of a tribal member quickly so that it's not lost in that recovery process. So those are two things that we've done to help with that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Kind of in the vein of, you know, what advice might you give to other tribes that are looking at this, particularly those that don't come from the mortgage lending industry, that don't maybe have a history in, you know, using the tools of finance to support home ownership in Indian country. Denise Sunny usually joins us on these calls. She's our legal beagle, and we really appreciate her work over the years. These are the kind of technical issues that we really like to bring to light here on the coalition calls. And so to continue this discussion, again, thanks, Tanya, for all you do. We're going to move the discussion over to our friends at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Sharon Kidman, Symone Jones, if you can unmute yourself, ask you to introduce yourself, and again, kind of speak to these, you know, your perspective on your side of, there you are, on your side of the activity. And again, same three questions, you know, what's going well, what can be improved, and what advice would you give to tribes who are looking to implement hearth and residential leasing for homeownership on tribal lands? Ms. Jones, is that you? Are you going to go first?
Oh, yes, sure. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Symone Jones. I'm a realty specialist at the Division of Real Estate Services in the Central Office. I joined the Central Office team will be about 2 years in March. Before that time, I worked many years in the field. It's nice to hear some familiar names out there. Steve Graham, I worked with him out at Navajo Region. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. My role in this is I'm a realty specialist primarily in leasing. Recently, we've just updated our business site lease handbook in the year that I've joined RES. So just continuing that work of providing any policy and guidance as needed as part of the division. So that's who I am. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Kidman, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Kidman. I am with the Office of Trust Services, Division of Real Estate Services Central Office in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I have been working with the Bureau for 20 years, but in that 20 years, my career had started out with the Division of Land Titles and Records. So I do have the background of recording, as I was the recorder at the Southwest region for several years during my career. I also did title examination work while I was there, but it included a lot of things like probates, gift deeds, all of that, and researching title itself for TSRs. And then from there, I was promoted to being a realty specialist at the Southern Pueblos Agency, where I worked alongside many of the tribal housing departments, and we had a great team of them that I worked with, that we all asked each other questions, and I made sure that we were not lagging with turning in the things that we needed to do. But I also kind of going through my own experience with home purchasing on fee land as a Native American, because I did the HUD 184 loan. So that kind of just helped all the more with my goal in servicing Indian country, which was to make sure that the process is quicker for Native Americans on trust land as it is on fee land. The process I went through on fee land was very quick and efficient, and I had my home and my keys in no time at all. But being a realty specialist, I had to put that more into action in my work every day when I was at the office. So it was very, it was an eye opener for me every day to ensure that, you know, I wanted to get these TSRs done for our clients, for those folks who are wanting to get into that home. So that said, I have now, since then, I left the field in March of 2020, and I am now the National Hearth Act Coordinator under the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where I've taken on a larger role of responsibility, where I handle all the incoming Hearth Act submissions from the tribes nationally. But I don't do that alone. There's a team of us that I call us a team. I may do all the paperwork for it, but the team also includes David Moran and Suzanne Nunn from the Office of the Solicitor, Bureau of Indian Affairs. They do the legal sufficiency review for these submissions, and they are online with us as well to handle any questions in case our viewers might have a question for them. But really the process for Hearth itself, and just listening to Mr. Burson and some of the others here give their talk, the BIA is all about trying to help the tribe get there. So we also took that into serious consideration, the Bureau did, and we recently updated the IAM policy for Hearth. So we are statutorily bound for the 120-day timeframe as of July 8th, 2020. So when a Hearth Act comes in, we are clicking that time clock, trying to get these approved in under that timeframe. However, there are those situations where tribes may have shut down for a month or so during the holidays, or there's a voting for a new chairman, president, what have you. And those are the things that we take into consideration that may put that timeline outside the 120 days. But apart from that, I was hired to fill that position to help us to stick to that 120-day timeframe review. But that is kind of what Hearth is all about, is assisting the tribe in their self-determination of doing leasing on their own land, and trying to do that for the betterment of their people in terms of residential leasing, the mortgages, what have you. So that's kind of my story. I've had a long history with that. I'm thankful though for these lessons that I've learned from groups like this, that we learn from each other and we pick up things. So I've learned a lot from the lenders too about processing and what they do. I'm happy to say that through all of this listening in the past year or two, I'm actually Fort Peck, born and raised Fort Peck, Assiniboine Sioux in Montana. And I'm happy to say that just last year, I helped my own family member, my first cousin. He just bought his own double wide trailer, brand new, and got to pick out all his stuff for it through the HUD 184 program. So I'm really happy about that. So these programs that are out there are wonderful for Indian country. So we're thankful for these partnerships, for the collaboration that we do with all of you. So anything that you have to say to help us, we will certainly take that into consideration as we go about and we do our job serving Indian country.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, early in my career, well, and throughout it really, I mean, when there are difficult issues to get through, it's easy to point the finger. A lot of times folks bash on the Bureau. I tell tribal leaders this all the time, the burden of leadership is a heavy one. I remember, some folks that I used to work with who were elected tribal leaders, getting recalled because the community was so distraught, But at the end of the day, you can point the finger, or you can do as you said, Ms. Kidman, is just kind of take the responsibility and work through the process. And that's really at the end of the day what's left. I know that the Bureau is historically has been underfunded and understaffed, and that happens in tribal governments as well. The office just isn't filled, or the capacity isn't there. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I really appreciate your commitment to this, your enthusiasm for it, Ms. Jones as well, and your work. We have some questions in the chat. We're coming to close to the end of our time here. If you're on Facebook Live, we are monitoring there, and we're monitoring here on Zoom. We have a question that came in. It looks like a two-part question. When a tribe submits a lease for recording, and I'm assuming this is a Hearth tribe. If it's not, please clarify here. But when a tribe submits a lease for recording, what does the realty office look at? Oops, it just moved on me. For example, do they review the ER process followed by the tribe or the lessee? What office does a tribe make a request for TAMS access and training? Can I pitch those over?
Okay. I can actually answer the first part of that question. So I'll repeat it because I can see it here in the chat.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, when a tribe submits a lease for recording, what does the realty office look at? For example, do they review the ER process followed by the tribe or lessee? And that question is from Denise Sunny. If this is a Hearth Act tribe, when the tribe submits that document to the local agency region for recording, the BIA, the position at that point is the BIA only looks for the things that is there a signature, or the parties have signed the lease. There's a legal description that they can use to encode into TAMS, and that, all the proper approvals are there. That's all BIA looks for. There's no more intense review that BIA used to do when we do the 162 leases. So we no longer do that type of review with a Hearth lease. So the answer to that is no, we don't look for those particular things in a Hearth Act lease that's been presented for encoding into TAMS and subsequent recording, the Land Titles and Records Office. The second part of that question says, what office does a tribe make a request for TAMS access and training? That would be through our office, Central Office, Division of Real Estate Services. On the call today is the acting division chief, Carla Clark. So I don't know if you have a few minutes for her to say hello to the group, but she is the one that the tribe would be working with, along with the regional realty office. So here in the Southwest region, that would be Douglas Hickman and Patricia Mattingly, the regional director. They would be working in conjunction with the tribe and our division chief, Carla Clark.
Okay, Ms. Clark, would you like to come on camera and off mute and say a few words?
Morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation for Sharon and Symone today. They are excellent POCs. I've been very impressed with them and their knowledge and the ability to convey and present this information. So again, thank you for your time today. I am acting for Charlene Roundface for 120 days, which takes me to the end of March of 2020. But very happy to participate and work with the wonderful staff here at Real Estate Services. We do report to Jonna Blackhair, who is the Deputy Bureau Director of Trust Services, and so also to Mr. Daryl LeCount, who is the BIA Director. So we look forward to any additional questions, any additional meetings or coordination that we may do after this training. And again, just want to say happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you so much, Ms. Clark. There are a couple more questions that came in, and these have to do with the seminal issue that comes up is the wait time. We talked about the 120-day turnaround, and we also talked about kind of the staffing shortages and COVID, how that's affected everything. And I think we have some of the lenders on the line who are asking a very specific question: is when a tribe or pueblo, what can they expect in a turnaround time and getting their grounds cleared so they can begin operating? I think that means getting the TSR and everything that's needed for site control to move forward. We've certainly seen a mix. We work with a number of pueblos throughout New Mexico, and those that are hearth tribes have often been able to kind of get everything in place within 30 to 60 days, which historically speaking is lightning quick. And then we've had other pueblos. I think we've got one deal in the hopper right now where it's been a little bit of extended, and one of the folks on the chat here is talking about 7-month wait. Is there anything, Ms. Clark or Ms. Kidman, Ms. Jones, that you can speak to in terms of processing times here in New Mexico?
Hi, this is Symone. I thought maybe I just thank you for your guiding questions, David. And I think I can try to maybe do two things and maybe answer some of those guiding questions that you had at the beginning of this, and maybe also shed some light on some of the questions that we have in the chat. And I'm sure more questions will come in, but we'll do our best to kind of answer here. So one of the questions that you had was what's going well with the Hearth Act in land leasing and residential leasing. I think that is really just the opportunity, not just for the tribe to assume approval for residential leasing, but also solar leasing and agricultural leasing in terms of economic infrastructure and development for those particular subjects. And then also, since Sharon joined as our Hearth Act coordinator, just to clarify, I'm not involved in the Hearth Act review process, just a realty specialist in leasing. But what's been encouraging to observe is just the tribes, more tribes obtaining approval. And so when more tribes are obtaining approval, there's that recording process that's needed. Certainly we're talking about the subject for residential leasing. And then kind of your third question for the panel was, what could be improved? I think certainly streamlining the recording to meet the needs of the tribe and those members is very important. Some of the things that our TAM system requires is more areas and fields of information. And so you said a very important word in our session, tribal self-determination and the tribe's ability to determine and make these decisions for themselves. So we're really trying to get away from anything that necessitates any sort of review. And kind of back to a question that was in the chat. So for instance, environmental review documents wouldn't be submitted to the BIA for recording. And I think the other thing that could be improved is really kind of providing training on those particular aspects. Kind of your last thing is what to advise to kind of improve this process. And I think it also kind of maybe lends to maybe the issue of processing and recording is that, when the tribe obtains Hearth Act approval, there's kind of like a line in the sand from the point forward that the tribe can go. But then there's also the understanding that needs to be made that before that time, the BIA approved leases under 162. So those are those particular authorities. So sometimes the rub and timeliness, those issues can impact if for instance, someone has a 162 lease that maybe only has a certain number of years, and then they want to lease that requires a certain other number of years, maybe 30 or something that you don't have, so you have interim situations. You have to have the understanding of what authority that you're dealing with that particular lease and what you're doing. And in regards to kind of waiting and that process of timeliness, like I think maybe someone in the chat is mentioning 9 to 12 months, certainly I think the BIA is very concerned about those. We also have other members of our team that are involved in the mortgage tracker, having those different discussions, and our acting division chief, Carla, is aware of those. I think even after this call, we're actually jumping onto a different topic that's related to this. So a lot of things are occurring, and I think we are very concerned about releasing and improving that time frame so that there's more turnaround for the members out in the community. I myself is also out from the community and understand sometimes the difficulty and trying to lock in rates and those different things. So really my last point of advisement, understanding that you have heard that going forward, those wonderful opportunities, and as well as understanding that you have past decisions, is we still have this relationship. This relationship still needs to kind of maybe be improved. And these sessions are very important to have, this communication, to make these connections. I'm actually very introverted, so I'm over here like appalled. I don't even do lives on my own social media, so I'm like, oh my goodness, and out here. So, but this is a very important topic to be able to advise upon. So I hope I answered your questions to the panel, and maybe hopefully sufficiently answered some of the questions in the chat. So thank you, everybody. And then I'll allow my other members to speak as well.
Yes, please. And I want to remind folks that we do have Mr. Moran and Ms. Nunn on the line as well. If you're in the process of looking to get your hearth approved, if there are any kind of questions on that front. I also want to recognize one comment that was made in the chat by Ms. Zuni, which I want to second, is my appreciation for the folks from the Bureau and Mr. Burson and Tribes to come together. It's wonderful to put a face to a name. We're all human beings, and in a lot of ways we're probably related in one way or the other, whether tribal affiliations or other, and we're all doing this work. So we really appreciate your time today. We do have time for some more questions. One that got put on here, Tanya, and I saw another one again from the lending community, right, is this question of the Bureau's time clock starts ticking, but so does HUD's in terms of the guarantee. And when that clock expires, it means increased costs for the buyer, the tribal member who's looking to buy a home. I know, the way the question was asked was like, are you aware of that? And I know you are, but maybe it's really a question of interagency coordination. On the other hand, maybe it speaks to that graph that I put up at the beginning of the session, which is most lenders went off reservation. They're doing deals. 90% of the 184s are done off reservation. And that, again, water flows the path of least resistance. And, maybe it's easier to do it off reservation. I think we know that is. But I think at the end of the day, the goal of the 184 program, the goal of NAHASDA, is to improve opportunities for people living on tribal trust lands. Not to say that folks living off reservation don't need support as well, but this is about building tribal economies and building homeownership in Indian country on tribal lands. So with that in mind, is there some interagency coordination that you could speak to that addresses, the time frames and expiration of those clocks, at HUD, requiring a borrower to kind of go back and possibly see some increased costs when that happens? Ms. Kidman, Ms. Jones, anyone?
I just wanted to add, I was listening to all the talk and seeing the questions too, but that for the most part, so let me speak first to Hearth Act tribes. For the most part, once a tribe goes hard with, let's just say, residential leasing, and they have their regulations in place and they are now doing their own residential leases and wanting to do mortgages for those leases. We at central office have encouraged and will continue to encourage the field and to remind them that they are still to be providing that technical service to the tribe. Meaning, if the tribe has a question and they're not quite sure, and they need to, ask the BIA, because essentially the tribe is taking on the role of the secretary in that part where they are approving that lease and now they're going to do a mortgage for it. So if there's questions or anything like that, those talks still need to happen with the field and the local lending office, whatever. So we still encourage the agencies and offices out there to have these technical meetings with the tribes whenever the tribe is wanting to have those talks. I remember before I left the field that when Isleta first took over their Hearth Act, that we had those talks. We would have these talks about what do we need to do? Is this what we have to do? We're going to have one of those talks today at 2:00. So that's what I mean is these talks still need to go on in terms of when a tribe goes hard. But when they're not hard and they're under the 162, they should be happening more frequently via the BIA to the tribe, to the lender. And believe me when I say that we are constantly reminded by Secretary Holland and Mr. Newland that this is a top priority, and the field is reminded that this is a top priority. So we have meetings once a month internally with the regional realty officers where the division chief goes over her report, and often this will come up and she will, remind them that this is a priority. I mean, they are told a lot and reminded a lot that this is a top priority and that these things need to be handled. But right, that time frame for it to get recorded and put out there does need to that needs to come way down, that time frame. So that is something that taking away from this meeting that our division chief is definitely taking note of, that we are taking note of, that we can go back to the field and say we still need to get on top these timeframes and bring them down. We're not talking 6 months. We're talking more like 60 days, 30 days. We want the 30-day time frame. So that's kind of what we have been doing out in the field in terms of that. But I know that one of the other things that had come up that you said, Dave, was that there is a shortage. We've got, realty specialists that have been out there for years and years. They're retiring. Who's going to fill their shoes? We have, different levels of people in their fields of experience. So those are very hard shoes to fill once someone leaves. So that's something that the BIA deals with. But that's not to add an excuse, but just to say that's one of the things that might play a problem or an issue in getting this done within that time frame. But if there's any questions regarding certain areas, though, I encourage the tribal partners that are here today to contact our acting division chief, Carla Clark, via the email, because she will raise that discussion with the respected regional realty officer of that region. So, because we want to make sure that these are being handled and not just left out there in some black hole that we don't want it to be in.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that. It kind of sparks a couple questions for me. And a recognition. First of all, I think all of us are just so thankful that Secretary Holland is in the historic position that she's in, that we have not just an advocate and a very capable individual, but someone who understands tribal reality, as I don't think any other former Secretary of Interior could. So we recognize that, we acknowledge that, and we're thankful for that. When I started my career, I started in the policy arena, intergovernmental affairs, tribal intergovernmental affairs. And so one of the things that I know that as we would have discussions on the Hill, again, between the tribal leadership and folks in the Senate, the House, and the various agencies, one of the things that our allies would tell us there is, we're doing what we can within our department, our agency or whatnot. But if this is what you need, and if this is a need that you see, you as tribal leaders, you as tribal practitioners, you as individuals, as private citizens, or through associations like SWIFA, which I mentioned, like the Native CFI network, which we're a part of, you have the ability, and tribes have the ability to go to Capitol Hill and advocate for what is needed. We've talked about kind of the low level of funding, the flat funding, and limited or seats and positions that go unfilled at the Bureau and other agencies. So I would encourage the folks that are on the call here is, although often we're focused on what needs to happen on the ground in the tribal communities that we work in, there is a role for you to play on the policy front, advocating for what you need, and how the various agencies, the Bureau in particular, can better service. And a lot of times that means headcount. A lot of times that means, looking at the regulations, commenting on the regulations, and being at the table when questions are being asked. And at least in this administration, as in some previous administrations like Obama administration and others, we're invited to those tables. So take advantage of that opportunity when asked. I certainly have probably been on 30 calls. I've been invited to serve on several federal agency boards, committees, and commissions. They want to hear from us now, and I think it's really it's our responsibility to be able to speak, especially if you're asked to speak before a field hearing or Senate or House committee hearing. The second thing I want to mention is the question of pipeline of folks that understand this business and the information, and growing our own. For a time, I sat on the board of directors for the Center for Construction in Indian Country at ASU, and we talked a lot about growing our own. Making sure that we're able to identify Native undergraduates who should consider a certificate in construction management, so that we could have more Native graduates working in the construction field. Ms. Kidman, Ms. Jones, Ms. Clark, others, is there anything that you might encourage us to do? Are there opportunities that tribal youth and tribal members who are making their way through their undergraduate programs at a community college or otherwise should keep in mind, so that we can continue to bring folks into the fold who can continue this work? Any special initiatives on the horizon, or anything that you've benefited from that tribes should know of to encourage continuing this work? One suggestion here is tribes need to hire the retiring realty specialist to build their own capacity. I know a few tribes that have done that, and it's gone well.
I was going to just suggest too that if a tribe out there has any questions about wanting to initiate a Hearth Act action, that they can certainly reach out to me. My email is sharon.kidman@bia.gov. And the process for that, we also are available to do training, Hearth Act overview trainings for a tribe, should they request it, or tribes. That can also come through the Bureau's regional office. They can make that request through them, or the tribe can contact me directly themselves. So we do want to get that out there, because at this time, we only have about 75 plus tribes that have done Hearth in various capacities, whether it's for business, residential, wind and solar, that kind of thing. But we do want to encourage the tribes that if they are interested, to reach out to us. David and Suzanne, who are on the call, they are part of that review. They are great contacts if you have any questions regarding the legal sufficiency review part of it. David, did you want to say a few words, you and Suzanne, before we close here? Because that's the one thing I didn't get to, Dave Castillo, is that I wanted to introduce them. Sorry about that.
Yes, please. And Ms. Clark has her hand up. So as division chief, I'll go to her first, and then go to Mr. Moran and Ms. Nunn. Ms. Clark?
Hi, good morning. I have Jonna Black here with me. She's the Deputy Bureau Director of Trust Services. She is in Lakewood today, so I'm going to let her say a few words just to welcome and talk about the initiative of the department and under her purview. So thank you all so much.
Hi, everyone.
Hey
Good
there.
to be here with you all today. I gotta figure out where her speaker is. Is it over here?
It's right on the camera.
Oh, okay. Yes, it's a great day to be here with Carla. She's doing a great job with the Division of Real Estate Services, and her leadership has been very valuable to taking on a lot of these initiatives and advance them, working with our lenders and our homeowners through her program and operations with field operations. Is there anything specific that you would like to ask of me while I'm
Yeah,
here?
so we've covered a lot of ground today. I think really the questions that we had were, again, from your perspective, what's working well, what can be improved, and most importantly, what advisement would you give to tribes that are looking to implement? We've heard the response to that a few times now, but from your perspective, is there anything else that you'd add to the conversation at this point?
I think having frequent open dialogue about the status and where we have to bring some consistency and working with our field operations. As you all know, we have all of our tribes working on different types of initiatives with this administration and the opportunities out there. We have congressional inquiries where we're having to respond to the infrastructure bill. The bipartisan infrastructure law is very important to our congressional leaders as they supported providing additional funds for tribes and tribal nations, for communities, for homes, and developing those homes where there may already be some NEPA coverage that wouldn't hinder our ability to process those transactions so that we can get those communities built where they're needed, or homes upgraded, or power lines, water lines, and broadband. As you know, broadband is huge. We need to get that out there and in place. We're working diligently to bring our systems of records and our application processes digitally, tracking, monitoring, and making sure that we're working with my counterpart, Deputy Bureau Director for Field Operations, is Bart Stevens. He's new to that position. He's assumed that position after Jim James retired in February was when Bart came on, and now full-time in that position, and put some performance measures and metrics for the regional directors to abide by, so that it's a high priority that we make sure that housing is one of those trust transactions that is moving forward in the most effective, streamlined process in this all-of-government approach.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. I think we all realize there's a big opportunity during this administration to make some significant advances, and thank you for and everyone there at the Bureau for being part of that process, and the tribal leadership and the practitioners as well. We did want to offer Mr. Moran and Ms. Nunn just a couple minutes as we kind of close out our session here, their expertise on that legal sufficiency element of getting a hearth regulation in place. Mr. Moran, Ms. Nunn, can you come off mute and join us?
One thing I wanted to share with you is we've had maybe you all are familiar with this, or maybe you're not. We've had issues with getting our Hearth Act process streamlined at the regional offices. So we centralized that to central office to work more in a coordinated effort with our regional folks and our regional realty offices that were charged to fulfill those obligations to get those Hearth Act approved. And so Susan Nunn and Sharon Kidman have been working together. Sharon Kidman has been brought on March of 2020. And since then, we've been able to provide, I think it's 22 Hearth Act approvals with a full-time central office employee coordinating with our field operations offices to assure that all the documents are in place and we have tribes advancing those opportunities under that authority. So a great amount of accomplishment by streamlining that processing, having one conduit, working with our solicitor's office and our tribe's legal representation and our tribal governments to advance Hearth Act opportunities, and strongly recommend that you take a look at our quarterly newsletter. We have some tribes that have some best practices that they've shared with us in providing an opportunity not only for our VIA employees to understand and know those processes, but providing training to tribal realty offices that have contracted or compacted those programs, including contractors that tribes hire to do those processes. So there is some training that Sharon is planning on conducting for the Hearth Act. Again, you know, with this virtual environment, it's proven that we can provide technical support and capacity building virtually, such as this engagement, and also to provide some opportunity for her office to say, with existing VI offices, what do we do in the transition period for a tribe entering into a Hearth Act and assuming all of these roles and responsibilities, and what is the handoff or the pass off to help assure that tribes are successful with the Hearth Act application through to approval and implementation. So I'm thankful to have been able to staff up mission critical positions in central office that have been vacant for almost a decade. So we have subject matter experts now working at the central office level that bring that field practitioner's perspective to central office to ensure that we're providing the best service possible. So I'm really proud of that and proud of our Division of Real Estate Services, and looking forward to more success and helping accomplish those goals and objectives, especially with this historic amount of money and support for Indian country that we have through the department and our federal partners, from President Biden all the way down to our realty specialists and our people out there that are providing these services as federal employees would as contracted or compacted programs.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think to add on to that, Ted Bulow was on from USDA, longtime partner as well on that end. I know the VA has been doing some work as well. There was an item in the chat just to remind everyone that in addition to the various tools that are out there, there's Senate Bill 5092, the Native American Rural Homeownership Improvement Act of 2021, which will make the USDA 502 pilot program permanent, which we've seen implemented at Cheyenne River, and really have great hope of expanding that. So a lot of opportunity now to speak up, to be heard, and as you mentioned, to get these positions filled and get the work done. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
We are kind of coming to a close. Are we able to bring on Mr. Moran and Ms. Nunn for a few words? Are you there, folks?
Yeah, hello, this is David Moran. Thank you again for the invite. We appreciate the call. And it's been a very interesting and informative session, I think. And I haven't worked with your group before. I've been working in solicitor office for many years, but I'm a native New Mexican, so it's glad to see that you guys are doing good work there. Just shortly, I think, again, Suzanne and I do several office do the legal sufficiency reviews for the Hearth Act. Basically, my email address is david.moran, M-O-R-A-N, at solicitor.doi.gov. If anybody has any questions. I would like to just make one brief, just overall comment based on what I've seen in the chat room and so forth. But, you know, I think going back to mirroring what Ms. Plummer and Mr. Burson indicated, it's really a matter of tribal, basically education, both in the leadership, I believe, and with their members. You know, the loss, I mean, the fear of the loss of property, you know, again, it's trust land. They're not gonna, the property itself is not gonna be lost. I think essentially, it's really what we're talking about in mortgaging leasehold interest. I know that basically is the fear of losing basically some control over the possession of that. But Ms. Plummer makes excellent points that really is no matter how you structure your Hearth Act. I mean, whether you allow for prior approval of leasehold mortgages, whether you allow for first option to purchase, first option to the tribe to purchase back the leasehold interest. There's ways that you can contractually, you can develop your Hearth Act to basically to allow the sovereign to keep control of that in the event of mortgages. I mean, in my view, I've worked in the Indian country for a long time. I think the Hearth Act is one of the best acts that Congress has passed to basically to give self-determination back to the tribes. I think it allows, it cuts down on the NEPA process, environmental process, which is, as you all know, is a big delay in any projects you're going to be doing on Indian country when you have to go through secretarial approval. I mean, if the tribe basically structures an environmental process that basically provides for a quick process, you can get these deals done fairly quickly, and they're in the hands of the tribe. I think we can do a better job in terms of our recording, quickly recording, but again, it's all within, bottom line, Suzanne could add to this. I mean, the Hearth Act is within the province of the tribe. You draft what you want to draft, what works best for your community and for your membership and for your leadership and so forth. It's in your control. And I encourage all tribes, basically, as much as we can. And Sharon has done a great job of developing, and along with Charlene Redhouse, to basically to develop training for both, not only the Bureau, but for tribal members. I mean, for tribal communities and their leadership to basically to provide training in this regard. It's a great initiative, I think. And again, we have, I think somebody mentioned maybe 75 approved Hearth Acts, but I think it's just a small percentage of those basically deal with residential leasing. Most of them are business leasing or alternative energy leasing and some agricultural leasing. But, again, so that's pretty much what I have to say. But then again, we're here to serve you guys. And if you have any questions or need, can talk or chat through any of this, I mean, we're more than happy to do so. But thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Moran, thank you so much for those comments. It looks like we are at the end of our time. For those folks who joined late, or if there were some technical difficulties, we have been recording this webinar and we'll be posting it to the MFA YouTube page. We're going to close the event with just some announcements. I believe Mr. Baird has an announcement, and then Ms. Herrera from Tiwa Lending Services will close out our session. Dustin, your announcement?
This is on behalf of Charlene Rosales and the MFA. She had to leave for an appointment, so she asked me to thank all the speakers and to let all of you know that we're going to be working on getting these webinar links and live streams right for the next meeting, and we do apologize about that. And with that, on behalf of Charlene and myself and Enterprise Community Partners, we thank you very much. Sheila?
Yeah, Ms. MFA and Enterprise Community Partners are a big part of this, and we appreciate you. I did want to make a note before we go off air, which is the newsletter that was mentioned from the Bureau. If you could post a link of that in the chat so that everyone can have access to it, appreciate it. And with that, Sheila, can you close us out?
Sure, thank you, Dave. So first of all, what a great turnout. Thank you to all our speakers and attendees for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us today. Well, just to let everybody know that this event is recorded and will be posted for anyone who would like to go back and review it later. And also the coalition will have another webinar in the new year at the end of the first quarter. So we're all excited about that. We're looking forward to meeting everybody in person or doing a site visit, COVID permitting. On behalf of New Mexico Tribal Homeownership Coalition, we wish everyone happy holidays. Please stay safe and healthy. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everybody.